Binney. Any Machon. Heroes the lot. Here he is. You have to pay to sit there. Yeah, 10 quid to sit next to me. Or make it 100. That's why I'm sitting out here. Brilliant, William.
Yeah, if anybody would like to move forwards, you're welcome to. Just a minute. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Julia Wagner. I'm delighted to welcome familiar face on the film, Bill Binney, director, cinematographer, Frederick Moser, and Annie Machon, who is ex-MI5 agent and whistleblower, who has got a lot to share with us as well. Sorry about the squeaking. We've got time for a discussion about the film, about the wider issues, and also for some audience questions. So please bear them in mind. I'm just going to try and wait for that feedback. Is that better? Great. Is this a question for right now or for Q&A?
Well, it's a little bit of an initial question for the benefit of people who don't know the history of this film, when it was made, how it got online, if it's classified in the US, can we distribute it here, can we show it here, can we obtain it?
Okay, we will cover all these issues.
Can't download it
I'm going to
yet.
welcome your questions at the end, because we're going to have time for everyone. We'd love to hear from all the panellists. Well, thank you for starting off with that. My first question to raise is, how did the film start? How did you get in touch? How did you find the issue? And how did you find working together?
Well, for me, this journey started on in the morning of the day when I opened my Facebook and I saw the interview with Ed Snowden in The Guardian. And up to that date, I had been working on a project about the business of surveillance, following the story of a German hacker who had supported the democratic movements in the Arab Spring and had run into American surveillance software legally employed in Syria. And they had then other hacktivists had scanned the web, basically, for traces of the software elsewhere, and they found it employed equally legally in almost all of the dictatorships, plus most of the European countries. And when we were about to get the money together to start the production, Snowden came out and it showed that the surveillance ongoing was just magnitudes bigger than what we had come across. So for me it was clear that this story about surveillance, the panorama of surveillance, would be made by the team that did the Snowden story, so Poitras and Greenwald and The Guardian. And my academic background is not filmmaking, it's history, so I have a degree in contemporary history. And my first question was, how did we get there? What were the developments from the Cold War, when these agencies were predominantly listening in on our military enemies? How did we come to a situation when we had become the enemies, we the citizens, because they were now listening in on us predominantly? And I thought a personal story would be the best way to portray these changes. And Bill was on top of my list, so I asked him, and he said yes.
Yeah, for a good film as this was, you need a great personality, and it's fortuitous. Bill, you had a lot of warmth on camera, and that really came across, and I think it made an excellent subject for the film. So how did you build a rapport with each other that enabled this sort of intimacy and this tone of secret telling, which is also a very public secret telling?
Well, I mean, I think we hit it off right away. I mean, I would put it that way, because the concerns he had were the same ones I had, which were the same. I was actually interested in human rights for everybody, not just for U.S. citizens. So that's why I was designing the system the way it was on the film and the way they corrupted it. There were a number of things built in that were part of that. One was filtering up front so the data on you and everybody else wouldn't be taken in unless you were relevant to some terrorist or international crime. Your data wouldn't be taken in. And if it was taken in, it would be encrypted until we could prove that you were a part of it. At that point, we had probable cause, and you would be targeted. But at the same time, we also had software that monitored the network that was accumulating all this data. And we were looking at who was coming in and using and going at the data, so we automatically diagnosed what they were doing and could alert on things, misuse of data or some illegal operation or unconstitutional operation that they would do. That would include the FBI and the DOJ and the White House, any political person in the government or anybody in CIA or NSA, all the NSA analysts. This is what they rejected, so we built it into our program separately. And that's that one, along with the filtering and the protections, were the things they removed immediately.
So, Fred, how did you develop an aesthetic which really reflected that the topics that you were talking about? How do you represent visually these scientific or mathematic algorithms? I think the graphics you developed are very striking. It's a fantastic brand, especially for a campaign. So, as a cinematographer, how did these ideas come to you? And did you make the suggestions for how to visualize it?
Actually, there were other people working on the visuals, and I discussed this all with them as to how I mentally thought of the process, and they translated that into some visual displays. That was really great. That was one of the reasons I jumped at the opportunity. I mean, Fritz was the only person that ever asked me to do a film. No U.S. filmmaker ever asked me at all. They still haven't. Okay, except for Laura Poitras. But for instance, when he asked that, I said, well, I've been trying to get this understanding out of what was really happening, and it wasn't really working because there were articles being written. We were on 60 Minutes and Frontline and a couple of other programs and on radio and TV, and it really wasn't getting through. So I thought, well, when he said this about the film, I thought immediately an art form like a film. It is something that a lot of people over a wide spectrum, not necessarily knowledgeable in mathematics or anything, could easily understand. So I thought this was a great opportunity, and I jumped at it.
And I of course, was pretty happy. I mean, we've got plenty of corruption going on in Austria, but not the sort of corruption that leads to a turning point in world history, as 9/11 has become. There are actually two answers. So one is the storytelling. So this is not the entirety of Bill's life. There's still more. And for me, what was most striking in terms of story was really that there had been an alternative to mass surveillance working, and they didn't use it because it was too cheap. And that this story basically was the counter-narrative to anything we had heard from the governments and from the intel agencies so far. And of course, this was something that made it clear to me that the main story of this film had to be the story of thin thread. Plus, to introduce people the concepts of what metadata was and how this actually worked, going back to the analog age where you could actually show things. Where it's not just ones and zeros, but where you have the military and the tanks and this kind of
different kinds of footage.
Yeah, exactly.
The history of film.
And noise and things that are perceivable. In terms of aesthetics, I love spy stories. So of course I'm a huge fan of James Bond and Jason Bourne and all this franchises, and especially
Mrs. Bond.
All the films from the 70s. One of the key films that I loved really, and have watched over and over again, although there is no reference to that film, is All the President's Men, about the Watergate scandal and how brilliantly it was told.
Can I perhaps bring up the X-Files music? Because everybody else thought that was like...
So then there is something else to this film. So although it is an Austrian production, there has been a team London on this, working on this. And these are the two really great composers that we had on it, Christopher Zlatsky and Guy Farley, who made a superb score, I think. And we even organized the money to do a live recording at Air Studios, which is kind of amazing for a documentary film. And Jamie Valio is the guy who is behind the animations. So he's the mastermind of the animations. And Jamie was I got Jamie involved early on because he was on the other project as well that I discontinued after the Snowden revelations. Because he also wanted to make an online project where the user in his or her own experience, could explore how Finchley actually worked. Unfortunately, we never got the money together for that one, but it would have been a really, really great thing to do. So I took involved from minute one, and from the first interviews that we did in late October 2013 in Vienna, Jamie was involved, and he really, I mean, this is really, so the visuals about Thin Thread are really his work.
But from a film aesthetic point of view, the way you use documentary footage and reconstruction and then moving into the digital imagery reflects what's happening in the intelligence world. So going from paper to analog to digital. So I think that's a really effective way of showing what's happened and the cultural changes, because we all feel the huge cultural changes that happened and the inability to keep up, which some people have.
Actually, from a cryptography point of view, going to digital was much simpler because everything was a standard. Once you solved the standard, you had the entire world. In the analog days, that wasn't true.
So what's the reception been like? And let's talk a bit about the campaign.
Well, we've been to something like 25 film festivals, both in Europe and the US, and the reception everywhere was great. I think it's a story nobody knows. I think it's a story many people should know about, especially in those countries where you have surveillance reform bills on the table, like the UK, like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Netherlands, and of course the US, because they always try to sneak in some creepy stuff in whatever legislation they are doing. And in America we had standing ovations actually.
Yeah.
And
In
you've
New
been
York and
to
DC.
show Congress. Do you want to talk about the show, for taking the film to a different?
Well, I mean, what I wanted to do early on, this was really like in summer of 2014, when we had done most of the interview, actually all of the interviews, or like 95% of the interviews, and I really knew the story. I thought, okay, this is something that we have to present to lawmakers and decision makers and to NGOs in order to make use of it, because it is really the counter-narrative to the prevailing narrative. And so this is when we started to hook up with people in the US first. There is a civil liberties coalition that has been built by a guy that we got to know in a private meeting, who, that basically englobes privacy advocacy groups, grassroots organizations, from the progressive left to the libertarian right, really across the spectrum. Plus, they also managed to organize in the House of Representatives, to organize a cross-party group that would fight surveillance. And that's an extraordinary achievement if you look at party politics and how it works in the US.
I'd love to bring in Annie now. And
yeah, in the UK and on the European level, very early on, Bill actually brought in Simon Davis, who is one of the co-founders of Previous International, and Annie. And so, actually, now it's your turn.
No, I don't, so I think this is working, yes. Yeah, it's been interesting because my background was as a whistleblower from the analog era, where I worked with a former colleague and my partner, David Shaler, who was the primary whistleblower, and I sort of helped him over those years. And we used to work for MI5 as intelligence officers in the 1990s, before resigning to go public about a series of crimes we witnessed. And because of that, we ended up going on the run, literally around Europe. We had to live in hiding for a year, in exile for another 2 years, and many of us were arrested, and David himself was arrested twice and put in prison twice for exposing the crimes of spies. So it's all a long time ago in the analog era. But from that, a number of lessons were learned. One, that we knew we were being pursued and watched in a very intensive way. So all these ghastly new tools that exist in the NSA and GCHQ in the UK is abusing were available if there were targeted suspects. The difference now with the internet is that they can do it on an industrial scale and grossly invade all our privacies. One of the other things from the MI5 years was I had a very historic perspective on the sheer scale of investigation into activists in the UK. Now, MI5 called this counter-subversion, but there were files on hundreds of thousands of people like us, purely for our political activity. Now, that was in the analog era, it was very resource intensive. Think how much more interesting, how much easier it is for the spy agencies now to look at all of us who want to use our right to freedom of expression.
So for the general public, our fear tends to be that if we use our credit card to buy something online, then criminals are going to take our details and go shopping for us and take our money. Are you saying that the main threat is from the governments?
Absolutely. And in fact, I would deem some elements of the intelligence agencies as criminals too, when they're picking up this information. So for example, at the moment we have a ghastly piece of legislation going through the Parliament called the Investigatory Powers Bill. And this has been opposed by people from all sorts of backgrounds, including Bill and myself, because it's hugely, grossly invasive and will shred forever any notion of privacy we might have in our own country. It's also very dangerous because once we lose that sense of privacy, we can no longer live in a functioning democracy. Because if you have no sense of privacy online, if you have a worry that you might be intercepted when you're emailing, when you're organising political activity, anything you watch, anything you read, etc., you start to self-censor. And that is the end of a fully functioning and open democracy. And there's a real danger. This is why so many of us speak out about this. Also, I suppose one other interesting aspect of the IP bill, as it's going through, is the government and GCHQ has tacitly acknowledged that they have been breaking the law. So when I say that some of them are criminals, they've already acknowledged it themselves, because they are saying they are updating the surveillance laws in the UK, and they're making legal things that the spies have been doing already for at least 15 years. They don't therefore say, oh, by the way, we were breaking the law, we were committing crimes, but that is the inference that we could all draw. So I think it's shocking.
That's why they kept it secret.
And how did you respond to the film? How did you first come to the film, and what was your initial reaction to it? How did it chime with your experience?
Oh, I thought it was hugely powerful, very emotional. It tells a wonderful personal story. And I think it's a wonderful way of getting these very complex issues out to a wider audience. I came to it because there's a sort of international association of whistleblowers coming out of the intelligence, the diplomatic and the military environment around the world. It's called the Sam Adams Associates. And every year we give an award to those who display integrity and intelligence. And we all sort of coalesced around WikiLeaks, and we coalesced around Edward Snowden, and all got to know each other. So we've been working much more closely globally as a bunch of concerned whistleblowers. And Bill was awarded the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence last year, and received it at a wonderful ceremony in Berlin, which of course is a sort of magnet for whistleblowers and activists and things. And I remember Edward Snowden being in to give a speech, and he said, if it weren't for Bill Binney, there would be no Edward Snowden. So that's an amazing tribute.
Yeah.
In one way, I'll say thank you for that. In another way, I have to apologize because I made the programs possible for them to do this. So, but I tried to do it properly, and they violated that. So we do, by the way, call ourselves VIPs, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. That's what we call it.
I was very distressed that Ray decided this year I was now old enough to be a veteran intelligence professional for sanity.
Bill, are you still working on cryptology and these systems?
No, actually, I'm just using it, everything I've been doing, I'm looking across the web, looking at all the data I can get together, unclassified, to assemble all the evidence to prove what they're doing today. So I'm looking at everything that's available on NSA, GCHQ, all the companies too, they're part of this, so I look at them also. And anytime I find something useful, I make sure I kind of share that so everybody has that knowledge, and I try to feed reporters so they can write about it and investigate it. The problem in the US is that investigative journalism is pretty, on the national security issue, is pretty much dead. Nobody wants to investigate that because they'll end up getting to be like Jim Risen or Jim Rosen of the AP. They'll be under threat of indictment or grand jury investigation, things like that. So they're threatening reporters. Actually, they're destroying the responsibility of the press to keep the public informed of what the government's doing under the First Amendment of our Constitution.
So
and then, of course, they scratch the Fourth and Fifth.
Spell out the main aims of the campaign, or how the campaign works with the other groups, and understand the sort of your film working with other organisations. So what are the next steps, and what are you specifically fighting for?
Well, I mean, this is now the premiering of the film in the UK, but actually we already had a screening on 4th of July in the House of Lords. And unfortunately, this was somehow overshadowed by the Brexit chaos. And so very few Lords actually and Baroness could attend, but they came from all the different political backgrounds, and they understood the concerns that the bill is raising and the film is raising. And I think what can be done in the UK is really to look into the IP bill, which is also called the Snoopers Charter. I think what you are getting, and I'm saying this on purpose as an Austrian, you are creating your own Gestapo, and you shouldn't do this, really. If you're mixing up policing and secret service, what you get is a secret police. And this is exactly what Gestapo means, literally. And you shouldn't do this. It's a big, big mistake.
So is it a myth, this the democratizing power of the internet? Do you feel that that's...
I think it's a tool, and any tool can be abused. Can be abused. So I don't think that the internet per se is a space that is super free and super anything. It's a tool to connect. It's also a tool to, bring together people and interactions and whatever at high speed compared to how it used to be. So it can be useful for both sides and for whatever purpose.
So where are the stumbling blocks in Europe, in Britain, in America? What are the main blocks to achieving what you would hope?
The governments.
Well,
I mean, they are the major impediment, because if you look at it, think about it for a minute, having all this knowledge on everybody on the planet gives them power over everyone. And what politician wants to give up power? That's the main one. The other one, of course, is money. And it takes an awful lot of money to do this. For example, you probably all heard about the Bluffdale, Utah storage facility that NSA built out there, a million square foot storage facility for data. That one's going to be full in about 3 to 5 years. So at that time, they broke ground last year for a 2.8 million square foot facility, one about 3 times the size on Fort Meade. They had to take out a 36-hole golf course to do it. Okay, so that one is going to come online in 4 to 5 years, somewhere around there. So by that time, this is planning ahead. If your objective is to collect everything that's at ever increasing amount every year, so that means you have to have ever increasing storage facilities to store all the content and metadata. If it was just metadata, all they'd have to do is have this space here up on the stage, and they could store all the metadata in every domain for everybody in the world for somewhere between 50 and 100 years. And every relationship. That's all the space they need for metadata. The rest of it's content.
And is the situation in America likely to change or improve? I don't really want to go into elections.
Actually, we do have a hope that it will change, and that this coalition we have of privacy advocates and freedom advocates, and along with some members of Congress. In fact, in 2014, I was supposed to testify to the coalition between Representative Amos and Conyers, a Republican and a Democrat. They had a coalition that they were forming to try to unfund NSA's activity of mass surveillance. And I was supposed to testify to them, so when they announced in the congressional record the date and time I was coming down, President Obama called a meeting of all the Democrats in the House at that time, so that canceled that meeting, and unfortunately 4 days later they had to vote on the bill, and they lost the bill by 12 votes. And that's out of 435 members of Congress voting. So that wasn't too bad. So it shows you there's a movement, there's a sense there. I mean, that the members of Congress have been lied to. They know that now by the committees, intelligence committees. They've been lied to by the White House, by the agencies involved. In fact, they're main targets for them too. Over here, when GCHQ and their lawyers told your Parliament that they couldn't tell who the Parliament members were in their bulk acquisition of data, they couldn't sort that out. We were doing that in the 1990s at fiber optic rate. And commercial products to do that came out in 2002, the Naris and Variant device to do that online in real time. So what they're doing, either one, they're just outright lying, or two, they've lost the competency to do it.
I would suggest the outright lying. So we have a situation in the UK where there's been massive opposition to this proposed IP bill. There have been many parliamentary select committees, and there have been hearings, and Bill and I and many other people have put in very strong objections to this gross bulk hoovering up of all our information in the UK. And despite that, all that evidence is just brushed aside, all the recommendations brushed aside, and Theresa May's government pushes through with the original wish list, which is a horror. It's a horror show. Even if we were to get to a point where, as citizens and lobbying our politicians and getting the government to change its mind and a much ameliorated bill was actually passed, even if that were to be the dream case, we cannot trust that that law will be upheld by the spies. This is what they do time and time and time again. They will lie to their parliamentary masters about what they're getting up to. They will do whatever they want to do outside the law and then just hide it under the carpet.
And in whose interests?
In their interests.
Individual?
Yes, it's sort of empire building. There is a huge amount of money in this. So, for example, Menwith Hill, the GCHQ NSA spying hub up in North Yorkshire, has just had a £15 billion upgrade. So those are big bucks. And also, one of the disclosures from Edward Snowden very early on was that GCHQ prostituted itself to the NSA to the tune of over $100 million. And it said to the NSA, overtly, we can do things you cannot do because there is more oversight in the USA. Give us some money and we'll prioritize your interests and break, what would be your laws to spy for you. And that is what they've been doing. They are prostitutes and they are lawbreakers.
Actually, it's a lot more than that, though. That was just for some of the upgrades in Butte, I think.
And making a film like this certainly has the transportable power to take something that people can watch and understand, and although it's just a fragment of what's going on, really. How do you see the media community responding to this? In an activist sort of, with an aim of activism?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, what I can say is that for many people in the media, even if there have been reporting on mass surveillance, the story is new because simply nobody asked that questions that I did. And I mean, there are the first reviews out. One of the first reviews was in The Guardian, and it was actually quite positive. And I mean, being rated 4-star, The Guardian is actually really positive. And I mean, I can say from Austria, that we had a hard time to convince people that this was a true story, because it's so extraordinary. And
getting finance for the film?
The financing, the financing actually was very interesting. So when I had done the first interviews with Bill, I had a meeting with the director of the Austrian Film Institute and told him the story, and he said, bring it on, and this is the amounts of money you have to ask to make it really good, which is what I did. But then you have a jury, actually a committee that assesses the projects and says, okay, we give money to this project or we don't. And this jury first didn't want to give us the money because their argument was, if this story was true, some American would already have done it. I mean, there is no logic in this, but some sort of weird logic maybe. But then they got convinced, yeah, but the story is so good, so maybe even if it's a mockumentary, the story is so good, we give him the money.
Well, watching it as a film lover, I was thinking, how can this story be any more film-like? We have all the elements, we have the goodies, the baddies, the intensity.
It is a Hollywood story, actually. I mean, it's so American.
Probably be remade with.
I hope so. I mean, I'm also holding the fiction rights. Yes. I'm trying to find a really good production company to do it, and to find a really good screenwriter to do it. And I hope for meeting Peter Morgan soon, and who did Frost Nixon and The Queen, and who is a brilliant writer. But going back to the message, I think what is so important about this film is, and what we're really trying to do is, we're really trying to make it accessible, to make something that is really vague and abstract, and it sounds very difficult to make it as accessible as possible by making it a human experience.
Yes.
So you're put in Bill Binney's shoes, you're learning with him how metadata is influential and really can be used for providing security and early warning, and you also see the moral conflicts that he is running into, you know, and the corruption he is running into. And so by making this film a human story and making it a personal story, this was really our goal. And I think, you know, because there was the question, so on the 23rd, we are starting with the UK release, and please, I mean, we don't have big budgets for a huge marketing campaign, but I think it's important that you spread the word about the film and about this story and bring it also to your local politicians. I think that's something they should know about when they are making decisions. That's the counter narrative. And if you have two narratives, you have choice. And this is what democracy is about, really, to choose. And if we don't, and, but I also think that there is an obligation on the part of the citizens, really, to be interested in what's happening.
There are two arguments really here. The first is that the current systems are inefficient, and you developed a cheap, efficient way to catch wrongdoers and offenders. And the other narrative is the question of, if you're not doing anything wrong, why be worried that you're being surveilled?
Irrelevant.
Completely. So if somebody thinks that he's not, that he has nothing to hide and he has nothing to feel, there's nothing to hide, I would advise him, go and duplicate the keys of your house or of your flat. Go to the next police station, hand it over to the police, and invite them to do as many searches as they want, whenever, wherever. Because this is the equivalent of what they are doing. A data search is like a house search. We have to get our minds around this. A data search is like a house search, and equal rules should be applied. So this means you need a warrant, and the warrant needs to be based on probable cause, and everything needs to be run through the courts. I mean, this has been working for centuries in some countries.
But actually it's worse than that, though. It gets into your thinking and the kinds of relationships you're building and things like that. And that's far beyond a house search.
And Annie, do you think that Brexit and a new Bill of Rights in the UK, these things are a way for sort of independence of the Secret Service and not having to be accountable to international law or human rights law?
No, I think it's going to be the opposite. So the only reason we have even a Human Rights Act in this country is because we were part of the EU.
Yeah.
Once we're out of it...
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a way out of distancing so that people are no longer accountable to the European?
No, I think it's going to get worse. There is a sort of mythologizing in the UK, James Bond being a notable example, where for decades we have been groomed to think that the spies are the good guys. They're not the Stasi, they're not the Gestapo, they're nothing like that. We're British, we're the good guys. So we've given an inordinate amount of trust to the three key spy organisations, and they have egregiously abused it for decades. And they lie about it, and they don't follow the law. And that's just going to get worse. So just one quick example from, again, the Snowden catch. One of the programs that was exposed very early on was the Tempora program, where GCHQ was mainlining all the information off the North Atlantic fibre optic cables. And in this case, that meant that they were getting everything for everyone in the UK. And immediately, the Foreign Secretary at the time, William Hague, and the chair at the time of the Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, leapt to the spies' defence. After 1 week, they said, we've conducted intensive inquiries and they're obeying the law. I've put a warrant in place, blah, blah, blah. All the cosmetics they need to say the spies are obeying the law. Now, one, William Hague should not be signing warrants that cover entire populations. Even the old omnibus warrants only covered specific groups, not the whole population of the UK. But bearing in mind the Tempora programme hoovered up all the transatlantic communications between Europe and North America, they were hoovering up all 500 million bits of people's information from across the whole of Europe. Now, where the hell does a foreign secretary, unelected by majority by the way at that time, get off in saying he signed a warrant to invade the privacy of 500 million fellow Europeans in countries that have no say in his election?
I'd like to open to...
Is it possible to...
with hands up, and I will... we've got some mics going around, so we we've got lots of questions. Make it
Is it possible to estimate the amount of satanic influence on both sides of the water? As far as I'm concerned, Westminster is 90% contaminated with satanic influence. How is it on the other side?
We've actually got a microphone at the back and somebody just with his hand up there, so we're just going to go to mics.
I would just say the forces of evil were too numerous.
You can't estimate 80%, 90%.
Yeah, this gentleman with the stripy shirt. Thank you.
Bill, this is a question for you. Very early on, in the opening parts of the film, you spoke of the end. You would be there until the end when you were describing you would never contemplate suicide. Just wondering if you could expound briefly upon your vision of the end, and I don't mean that in terms of life. I mean the end goal of what you're shooting for. I guess as an optimist, I'm hoping for some sort of utopian interpretation of how we might turn the situation around. But clearly, you'll be a lot more pragmatic than I will in that. So if you could just briefly explain what that might look like for us.
Well, for me, the end, I mean, obviously we have to have some kind of monitoring system running, because there are evil people in the world that want to kill you, like the terrorists and so on. So we have to do something to stop people getting killed. So, but the point is, what is it that we should do? Well, we tried to construct that in the 1990s and succeeded at doing that, which was a targeted approach, focusing in on those who were directly involved in terrorism, those who were in the social network, very close proximity to them, so that they were likely to be, they fell into what we call the zone of suspicion. So that limited our look at those people, and no other data was taken in that could be abused by government of any kind, or any department of government. So that you restricted the data that they had available to abuse, basically. And that is the way, that's a disciplined professional approach that they should be doing.
So you would hope for a system.
Exactly.
In place.
Yeah. And that would give everybody privacy. Nobody's privacy would be violated at all. And you would be looking at a highly rich environment that would help you detect threats that were relevant to international crime or terrorism, things of that nature. And you could actually become effective. What they've done by this bulk thing is they've dumped all this data on everybody, and they can't figure out threats in advance, and so the end result is people have to get killed first, and then they go look to see in the massive amounts. What they find out who did that, they have a massive amount of data on them. Then they retroactively analyze it. Well, that's not the way to do it. I mean, you're supposed to prevent people getting killed, not clean up the mess afterward.
Can I just add to that as well? That if you look at all the recent attacks across Europe and across North America, lone wolf attacks, larger scale attacks, all those people who are alleged to have carried these out have already been known to the intelligence community, but they fell through the cracks because the intelligence community is swamped in this data, this useless data. So they need to sharpen up to protect us better. And I absolutely agree with Bill when he says the intelligence they have is only being used retrospectively to work out what happened in the run-up to a successful terrorist attack. Isn't that what the police do, or supposed to do? This is not intelligence work where you preemptively stop an attack through analysing the intelligence in advance. This is police retrospective work, and they should not, within a democracy, have the sort of all-intrusive powers to do this, to have access to all our information, to ruin all our privacy, to do police work when they gather evidence, put people on trial.
Thank you.
I would also love to add something. So there are technical aspects in these answers, but I think we have to think this way bigger. I think there is a real problem in who is handling these powers, and a problem of oversight. And I think we need to reorganize in any democracy in the world. That's not just a UK or US question. In any democracy in the world, in order to be able to guarantee the privacy, you need to reorganize the entire national security makeup, actually, in who is responsible for what, and how can you guarantee effective and efficient control. But that's a large discussion.
Thank you. Okay, there's somebody just, did you come down this side? If you bring the mic, yeah, this lady here, thank you. And then you can pass the mic to the person in front.
I'd like to ask, this is very much a simpleton's question. Before the on the desk, do you feel threatened? Is your life made worse by it? And also, I'd like to ask if there are any spooks in the audience tracking you. If so, would they please identify them?
Thank you. Did you all catch that?
Actually, I believe I'm constantly monitored, and I'm a target all the time, so I say whatever I want to say, and I want them to know what I think of them. So I say it out in the open, and if they ever if they ever say anything that is classified or sensitive, and they're going to try me on some case, drum up charges or something, everything's in the public domain, they can't claim it's secret.
In my case, the only real detrimental experience that I had was in the run-up to a deadline for a new project. Emails were intercepted and withheld from my computer to the email server until the deadline had passed, and then they were released. And for this very particular strange interference, we missed the deadline. So, we don't know who did it, but we have some guesses.
In my case, certainly at the height of the whistleblowing years with David Shaler, we were under intensive surveillance. We even found out that a couple of our very old friends had been forced to report back on us as well. So we got used to the concept of not having privacy in our own homes, of not being able to talk freely, even with our relatives, over our telephones. And that's very corrosive, where you think you've got no privacy whatsoever. Very corrosive to your spirit. After that, it all died down. David paid his debt to society by going to prison for exposing the crimes of others. And doing nothing wrong. I'm a bit of a campaigner now, and a writer and speaker. And it was in 2008, when I was still living in London, that my mobile phone started playing up. And it turned out that the software on it had malfunctioned. So it had disclosed itself as what was then a recording device. So it was picking up what was around it as a recorder. And I thought, 2008, this is like a decade after the whistleblowing. What the? So that's when I took the decision to get out of this country. Now, one at that point thought, okay, perhaps it's only the UK. Now, of course, it's all over Europe, and particularly Germany has been very complicit in working with the NSA as well. So it's very, very difficult. I mean, there are beacons of hope, I think, which perhaps we can finish on in terms of how we protect ourselves. But it does get very wearing, and as I said earlier, it is societally damaging not to have a sense of privacy.
And would anybody like to assess the spookiness? You don't have to. Yeah, the gentleman, thank you.
I'll declare myself as a part of the media. My name's Martin Bright, and I've reported on these matters for a number of years. I was a journalist at the Observer for a long time, and in fact reported on the David Shaler and Annie's case. And I mean, I'd like to congratulate you. I thought it was a fabulous film, really beautifully done, beautifully told. And for me, at the heart of it is a morality tale that what we're talking about here is people within the intelligence services attempting to be moral beings in a very within very difficult circumstances. I wanted to bring to your attention the case of Catherine Gunn, which has not been mentioned, GCHQ whistleblower from 2003, just before the Iraq War, who leaked details of an NSA operation where they had ordered GCHQ to spy on the United Nations in the run-up to the Iraq War. This is about to be made into a film. I think there is a huge amount of interest in this kind of thing at the moment, so I really wish you luck with having this made into a fiction film.
Thank you. Is there a question?
The question is, to Bill really, the operation that was carried out that Catherine Gunn, in her moral sense, felt so aggrieved about, would that have been authorised at the highest level, or was this simply something that happened all the time? Did the NSA simply order GCHQ in 2003 to spy on the UN for?
Well, I think it's just another example of the cooperative agreement. They have to work together to do things. That's all. It's just a matter of, let's focus here. Okay.
Can I just add as well that Catherine Gunn is also a member of the Sam Adams Associates. She was in Berlin when Bill was given his award. And I also just want to say a huge thank you to Martin Bright for his courage in protecting his sources, both David Shaler and myself, and particularly Catherine Gunn. He's one of the few in the media who will go above and beyond and take personal risks to protect them. So it's lovely to see you here.
I have a quick question, perhaps, for Annie and Bill. How are your relationships with NSA and MI5 now? Do you, as former employers, is there any kind of protection? Are you sort of thrown out on the street?
I'm suing them now. I'm actually supporting 4 separate lawsuits in 4 different appeals courts of the United States, suing NSA and the Department of Justice and the FBI for unconstitutionally spying on everybody in the U.S. That's the only thing we have laws against, so we can use that against them. But it applies to everybody. It's basically suing them for human rights.
But if you work with a company for however long, say it's a very boring institution,
Yeah.
you get a pension, you get some kind of protection or whatever. But then if you break your contract with them, in their eyes, it's all gone. You just sort of out of the street.
First of all, I still have a lot of friends working at NSA, and I don't call them at all. Because if I did, being a target, if they ever talked to me, the FBI would hop on them in a minute, be interrogating them, take them over the coals. So I don't do that to them, okay? So, and they know that, they don't call me. Because internally in NSA, they have instituted exactly what the Stasi did. They have a program called See Something, Say Something on Your Fellow Employees. Now that is a totally disruptive influence on the work environment. And that's the kind of operation these people are like. This is the mentality they dictate down through the management.
If you tried to report wrongdoings within the NSA, that's something
actually, I didn't, not within NSA. Within the U.S. government, the Inspector Generals of both the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice, which is by now called the Department of Just Us.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not on the MI5 Christmas card list, should we say. They never forgive and they never forget. And as of the 2008 mobile phone instance, rather alerting me to, nor would I really want to have much to do with them now, to be quite frank. Having said that, there are good people who do go into these agencies, who do try and make a difference. They want a job that will make a difference and try and protect people and save lives. I'm not saying they're all evil, but the inherent problems are that they're because they're so enclosed, because they are so secretive, they become very hothouse sort of environments in which to work. So when you do raise concerns, ethical questions, you are just told to shut up, just follow orders, and not rock the boat, which is why so many more of us now are increasingly coming out of these agencies to try and enforce reform and change from the outside by creating scandal, which is the one thing they hate. I've been saying for years, the best way forward for the intelligence community in the UK would be to set up an effective channel that people with real ethical concerns can go to, with the understanding that they will be properly investigated and criminals prosecuted and held to account. Now, I know this is probably just a pipe dream, it's not going to happen in reality, but if that sort of channel existed, then people on the inside would not have to ruin their professional lives and risk prison because they want to expose the crimes of others. And I would suggest that is a win-win situation, because the potential whistleblowers can follow their consciences and make a difference on the inside and keep their careers, but then the intelligence agencies avoid a nasty scandal.
I can add to that. In the U.S., it is under the rules of regulations for employment with the U.S. government. You are required to report corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. That's a requirement for employment. But when you do, what that does is they now attack you. As in our case, or in the case of anybody else that preceded us. There were others who went before us. Tom Drake, they took over the coals, they fabricated evidence that was a fabrication. They manufactured evidence and tried to put him away for 35 years. These are the kind of people we're dealing with. That's why I call it the Department of Justice.
We've got time for a couple more questions.
Can we come this side now?
And then we'll pass it right over to this side. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to make this quick and fast. Half a century ago, I came to this country as London correspondent for Pacifica Radio, which you probably know, WBAI in New York, KPFK Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles. We gave birth to Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, which is still running. And I got into the habit of paying attention. and I've set up 4 websites and a couple of blogs. Now, what this is leading to is that the still surviving investigative journalists that I'm regularly in touch with, and the economists and the political analysts are in agreement on one essential fact, that Jimmy Carter was right, America is an oligarchy, and that this country is an oligarchy as well, that the collapse of 2007, 2008 is certainly going to happen again on a vastly larger scale. All the things are in place for it. And now what this leads to is that, again, in all of their opinions, the entire internal security mechanism, both the gathering of information and the equipping of local police forces with military weapons, is there not to deal with foreign terrorists, but to deal with domestic insurrection. That is the primary purpose of it all.
Thank you. We've got,
I call it
before we
population
answer,
control.
we're just going to just take one more question, and then we're going to, can we answer 2 questions together, then we're going to have some closing remarks. I'm sorry, time is tight and the questions are many, so 1 point, okay, thank you.
I have 2 questions. And the first is, it's good to see that there's an effective alternative to the system that we have now, but not in regards to privacy and in regards to the efficiency of your program. To what extent do you think the frameworks of your program have been implemented in countries right now? And how would you have developed your program differently with the advent of the Tor and Onion privacy that we have now, that obviously the NSA must be struggling with?
Thank you. You able to answer both points, and then we're going to have some closing
Well,
remarks?
I would have continued doing a disciplined professional approach, doing the focused aspect. Encryption, by the way, doesn't affect anything on metadata, because the metadata has to be either routed through the network. And so you capitalize on that and work things out with that and focus on that. And then for the Tor network, under the Treasure Mapper program, if you go on the web and do NSA space treasure map Google, you'll get the entire program. You can look at that. Internally in that is where they've implanted in over, I think, 700 sites, switches in the network in the European area, trace route programs. So they can take millions of trace routes every day off each of those implants. And they're trying to trace route every packet through the network and stick it back at Tor. So, I mean, I don't think, I mean, it's a difficult thing, it adds work for them, so, I mean, it's a good thing to do.
Do you want to respond to the comment from the front, or I know Annie has to get going.
Very, very quickly, I think you're completely right. There is a book in preparation by a researcher from Columbia University who looks into the history of big data exploitation, and he said, I think it was him who said it in a conference, or it must have been another professor from Columbia University, but basically they are reviewing like the entire papers, you know, mass surveillance was not set up from one day to the other, and they say the first papers were started to be floated around in the early 1990s after this rapid collapse of the Soviet Union that nobody could foresee, and that this basically triggered a fear that the same could happen to capitalism.
Annie, to close.
Can I add just one thing? Yes, on that 2007-2008 financial crisis? The same thing. Elliot Spitzer, who was then, I think, the Attorney General of the state of New York, was going after the bankers on Wall Street for defrauding people. He was going to go after them criminally. And so Washington, of course, said, we've got to save our bankers. They were also complicit, and they encouraged the banks to do these
feed them with money.
Or highly risky mortgages, and then they'd have packaged them and fraudulently solicit them around the world. And so that's what Elliot was going after them. So they had to go after him to stop him. So they needed to go into the phone calls, emails, financial transactions, credit cards, travel, all that stuff, to find something on him to get rid of him. They eventually did. They found him messing around with a prostitute, and they used that to get rid of him. But that saved their bankers. And then there's a series of things that happened after that. Mueller from the FBI retired. Alexander from NSA retired. They formed this consulting, cybersecurity consulting thing. They were asking $1 million a month for their services, and then he downgraded it to $600,000 a month. And these were the guys who were in charge of the people who investigated and people who had the data and people who investigated the data, and against Elliott. And so the first customers were the bankers on Wall Street. This just smells.
Yeah, I'm very sorry, I have to dive off to get a Eurostar imminently. So I just want to say very few comments. You mentioned Tor. Having knocked around the sort of hacktivist circles in Berlin for quite a while now, I understand even Edward Snowden says that you have a fighting chance to use a suite of tools. So this means that you